July 30th is when the NBA is scheduled to start, and when they do, what are some of the biggest questions for the 76ers heading into Orlando? Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the Sixers and the NBA for CBS Sports at The Real Mike KB. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Let's start with that, though, MKB. With all the stuff going on, these different cases of athletes, not just all over the place, but athletes, and specifically within the state of Florida, is there some concern about the NBA's return?
Yeah, Mike, there's definitely a level of concern, especially given, like you just said, the growing number of cases in Florida specifically. It hasn't reached a fever pitch point yet within the league where they're considering changing the situation or potentially not having the season. But, like you said, there's still a full month until the season's supposed to begin. And, a lot could certainly change between now and then. And there is definitely, at least concern within the league offices given the rising number of cases.
So let's go to the Sixers then and kind of take a look at some of their questions as they get ready for this. Number one, let's go to Ben Simmons. Where's Ben Simmons? What kind of shape is he in? Kind of a murky conversation the other day from an article that Brett Brown essentially said, well, we hope to have him. It sounded as many reports suggested that he would definitively be back, and then you heard Brown not necessarily jiving with that. So did that give you some pause on Ben Simmons? What do we know about Ben? What do you anticipate from him?
Yeah, I do think Ben will be good to go. I think Brett was trying to maybe temper expectations a little bit, given the fact that it's been such a long layoff and he's coming off of a back injury that, maybe he's not going to look necessarily like, Ben Simmons at the peak of his powers like he did before the injury. But, when Elton talked to media members last month, he said that he fully expected Ben to be good to go when the season resumed. There's been clips going around on social media of Ben working out with LeBron and other players in LA, and he looks, pretty healthy in those clips. He's throwing down some dunks and everything like that. So, he looks good. I think that the expectation within the Sixers is that he will be good to go. I think it's just a matter of, how close will he be to being at his best at that point in Orlando. And I think Brett is probably just trying to, keep the expectations somewhat in check.
How about the fact that they will be playing away from the Wells Fargo Center? Is it possible that it actually helps them that no one will be in the stadium or the arena because they're going to have to just focus at a different level? It's going to be so weird. It's going to be so unique that maybe it's good for them to come together and say, we got to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a great, possibility in the fact that it's, they've been touted as a team that was built for the playoffs for so long. Now that they're finally presented with the playoffs in a setting, like you just said, where it's, different. There's not going to be fans in the arena that they can rely on, like a home court advantage type thing. They'll really have to buckle down as a team. And there's, for the Sixers specifically, I think there's a good chance that could really benefit them in terms of getting, the chemistry together and kind of helping them focus on the singular goal. Obviously they had some ups and downs during the course of the regular season, but being in a situation like this where they're either forced to kind of buckle down and get on the same page or else they're going to be eliminated early, could obviously go either way, and it's impossible to tell for certain. But it does seem like it will provide an opportunity for them to kind of, gain cohesion and gel as a unit.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, I want to go back to Simmons real fast. While we feel that he will play, do you anticipate he's going to have minute restrictions, or do you see him 35, 38 minutes a game once he comes back?
Early on, he'll have definitely some sort of restrictions given the long layoff. I think they'll use those 8 regular season games, as a good test for him to kind of ramp back up. I'm sure at the first couple games he'll probably be, maybe even somewhere in the mid-20s, and they'll try to ramp him back up. He was one of the leaders in minutes per game throughout the regular season. So obviously it might be a little bit down from the numbers that we saw him play throughout the course of the season. But I do think that, it's a situation where they have those 8 regular season games. They can't drop any lower in the standings, really. And they, maybe they'll climb a spot or two. But I think for them, those games will be more important just to, get the conditioning back up for all their guys. Brett to, figure out the roster and the rotation and how he wants to do it. And, kind of just get everything together for the postseason push. So I think it'll be, ultimately, I think the goal is that they want him playing as close to as many minutes as he can handle in the postseason. But early on, they'll probably be, limited to an extent.
So what does that do potentially for their starting lineup? I mean, obviously Ben would start, but does that mean if he's only going to play some limited minutes that you don't start Shake Milton with him? I mean, how does that affect the possible starting lineup?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most interesting questions, about the Sixers right now, Mike, because they just have so many different options. At the beginning of the season, it was, pretty clear what the starting lineup was going to be coming in with, the additions that they made over the summer. But at this point, with, after getting a sample size of 60-some games with, the Al Horford and Tobias and the other guys they added at the deadline, it's clear that there's, some tinkering that needs to be done. And I think Shake was one player that kind of really was obviously coming into his own before the season was suspended, and I think he figures to play a big role. If it's a starting spot right away, I don't know. Like you said, it might be, better for him and the team at this point if Ben's going to come along slowly to start, someone else there and let Shake handle a bulk of the minutes after when Ben comes off to get his rest. But, either way, I expect Brett to probably tinker, a good amount during that first week or two back before the postseason starts to try to nail something down, because he didn't really have the opportunity to find a lineup that he seemed completely comfortable with before the season was suspended, due largely, obviously, to the injuries to Joel and Ben. He was, forced to tinker a lot, and I think now that the roster is, pretty close to fully healthy, he'll want to get more of a solid rotation in place so the guys know, exactly what their role is going to be and what's going to be expected of them, on a night-in, night-out basis.
Mike Scott definitely had a down year this year, but towards the end, before the stoppage, he was actually playing some 5, and it wasn't that bad. And I wonder, do you think it's possible that he will be able to play any 5 in the postseason with Embiid playing 38 minutes a night, like Brett Brown said, having to implement Al Horford? Or do you think that he'll pretty much just be a stretch 4 for the rest of the time here?
There'll be, situations, Brody, where there's, chances to play him at a small ball 5, depending on the matchup. Obviously, if they do decide to move Al to the bench, he'll be the first big off the bench, but, once Joel goes out. But there are certain stretches of games, depending on the matchups, where obviously Brett will like to go small. And I think in that situation, Mike is the perfect guy. He has decent size, he's a decent rebounder and a decent floor spacer, and he could, he's not going to get tons of minutes at that position, but he's the type of guy that could eat maybe, 6 or 8 minutes at a time. Well, if Joel is in foul trouble or not feeling great, or Al is in a situation like that, I think you'll see some spot minutes for it. But Mike is a guy that, his role is going to be largely based on, I think, how he responds to the minutes he gets. Like you alluded to, it was kind of a disappointing season for him, up until right before the season was suspended. So I think he'll be given an opportunity early on during those first 8 regular season games. And then, depending on how he's playing and depending on the matchup, I think you could see some him at the 5 spot for sure.
I know we've seen video of Ben Simmons, and he's been working out. He looks like he's jacked. He's dunking. But what about Joel Embiid? What kind of shape do we anticipate Joel being in?
He said recently to the Sixers that he's been working out 6 times a week for several weeks, ramping up, just ready to, preparing himself in case the league was going to come back. And obviously now, since it's been announced that it was coming back. So, at this point, we have to just take him at his word. Obviously, it's going to be a tough, for him and every other player to get back into that game rhythm. But, I think he's a guy that's motivated now. He had just like Mike Scott did, he kind of had an underwhelming year for himself. He said as much, basically in that interview with the Sixers, that he was kind of underwhelmed with his first half of the season, but he felt like he kind of turned a corner after the All-Star break and was starting to play better and find a rhythm. That was obviously disrupted with the injury that he suffered right before the season was suspended. But, I think he's mentally prepared to go out and show people what he can do. And physically, he said he's been, in the gym working out. So I'm sure he won't be in good shape quite yet, like most players won't be. But, he said he's been preparing. And at this point, we just have to, take him at his word.
Do you think that Brett Brown is coaching for his job this postseason run?
It's such a difficult question because, if that had been the case, if the season was completely normal and it had taken place on time and there wasn't the suspension, I think the easy answer to that question would have been yes. If he had, obviously, if the Sixers had lost in the first round or the second round again during normal circumstances, I think absolutely at that point they would have looked to go. But the way the situation is now with the league and the schedule getting obviously pushed back, and now the fact that there's a much shorter gap in between when the Orlando season will end and the truncated off season, and they want to get right back to the 2021 season, and potentially as early as the beginning of December. That's tough to make a coaching change for a team with championship expectations. It would be, putting in an entire new system, offense, getting accustomed to a new coach in obviously what will be a really short off season. So I think, at this point, it's really interesting to see. I do think some of it will be depending on how they perform still. Obviously, if they go out and get embarrassed and swept in the first round, you could probably say that Brett will be gone. But if it's a similar situation to last year, where they get into a second round or something and it's a dogfight and they end up losing, at that point, do you look to make a change with such a short off season? Obviously, I don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting. It's a layer that wouldn't have been there if the season had just continued normally. I think it would have been a lot more black and white to answer that question. But as it is, it's tough to say.
He's at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. You can read his full article on the 5 biggest questions for the 76ers heading into Orlando at CBSSports.com, and you can get that at The Real Mike KB. And he was kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Mike, take care, pal.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
You got it. That's MKB right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.